By the time the United States entered the Great War in Europe in 1917, the Western Front had become a bloody landscape scarred by more than 3 years of inconclusive trench warfare. Unlike World War II, which raged across Europe, North Africa, and part of Asia and the Pacific, World War I had largely confined its enormous destruction to a narrow but lengthy front in Western Europe extending unbroken from the Mediterranean to the North Sea. Thousands of artillery batteries and heavy Creusot machine guns, such as the German Maxim, produced carnage of an unprecedented magnitude all along the Western Front. The American Expeditionary Forces, AEF, led by GEN John J. Blackjack Pershing, arriving with elan and high enthusiasm, hoped to change the character of the war and to force a breakout by the exhausted Allies using maneuver. Critical to the success of any attempt to break through the imposing German defenses was an assurance that assault troops would have overwhelming firepower upon reaching the German lines. Over the top was too often the last command heard by Allied troops as they scrambled out of their trench lines, their bolt-action rifles with fixed bayonets carried at high port into the withering German machine gun fire. The few who reached the German lines realized that they lacked an automatic weapon that could be carried by one man to augment the limited and slow firepower provided by bolt-action rifles. In the autumn of 1918, a powerful new American weapon was introduced to provide assault troops that type of weapon, the Browning automatic rifle, then and thereafter known simply as the BAR, not BAR. The BAR gave attacking troops a genuine tactical advantage in the offensive. It became a legendary weapon that saw service in World War I, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. Even in recent Third World clashes, BARs are still sometimes used in combat, giving the BAR's service record eclipsed in length perhaps only by the famous Colt .45 automatic pistol, model 1911. In his memoirs titled My Experiences in the World War, published in 1931, Pershing wrote about the pressing need at the beginning of the war for the United States to develop automatic weapons. The development of the machine gun as an infantry weapon, following the experience of the Russo-Japanese War, had been carried to a high degree of perfection, especially in the German army, where its value was more fully appreciated than among the Allies. The question of adopting new types of machine guns and automatic rifles for our army had been discussed at home for years, and test after test had been made. The result was that when we entered the war, no conclusion regarding the best make of gun had been reached. Not only were we without sufficient machine guns, but also our organization tables did not anticipate their using anything like the numbers employed by the enemy. Thousands of German Creusot, water-cooled Maxim 8mm machine guns had taken a fearsome toll along the Western Front when the United States finally entered the war in April 1917. The German Maxim gun, called the Devil's Paintbrush for its wide swath of deadly and long-sustained rate of fire, was a formidable weapon capable of firing without interruption as many as 2,000 rounds before all the water in the cooling jacket enveloping the barrel boiled away, requiring that the jacket be refilled. At the start of the war, Germany had over 12,000 of these weapons available for field use. They were devastating defensive weapons when deployed in nests among the trenches, with interlocking fields of fire along a continuous front. The BAR gave AEF assault troops the firepower needed to neutralize the German trenches upon reaching them. Patented in 1917 by renowned gun designer John Browning and adopted by the Army in May 1918, the BAR was introduced to American frontline units in September 1918 as the M1918. Frontline commanders, at first reluctant to employ the BAR in situations where it could be captured and copied by the enemy, were soon convinced that the firepower advantage far outweighed the risk of capture and copying. Firing the powerful .30-06 ammunition also used in the Springfield M1903 rifle, the BAR added great firepower to the leading assault units in the last major campaigns of the war, St. Mihiel, September 1918, and Mézargorn, September-November 1918. The BAR is a gas-operated, air-cooled, open-bolt, magazine-fed automatic rifle. Although often used as a light machine gun, it was not designed as such. It is not a submachine gun or an assault rifle. The shooter could not change its barrel, which meant that its capability to provide sustained automatic fire was limited. A high rate of fire requires that an automatic weapon's barrel be changed at various intervals to prevent the barrel from overheating. It was advertised as being light and highly portable, but the infantryman who carried the weapon, with bipod and a web belt with extra magazines, would disagree with that description. The weapon with its cartridge belt and extra magazines weighed approximately 40 pounds. The weapon itself weighed approximately 19 pounds empty, had an air-cooled 24-inch barrel, a detachable 20-round box magazine inserted from the bottom of the receiver, and an effective range of over 600 yards. When loaded with a full 20-round magazine, it weighed just over 20 pounds. The original bar developed for World War I was designed to fire either semi-automatically or fully automatically. A later model, adopted in 1940 and designated the M1918A2, eliminated the M1918 semi-automatic fire capability. Instead, it had two rates of fully automatic fire that the gunner could select: 300 to 450 rounds per minute or 500 to 650 rounds per minute. The M1918A2 also had a bipod and flash suppressor at the muzzle of the weapon and a hinged butt plate that folded over the butt of the stock. When the butt plate was raised, it protruded to the rear and over the shooter's shoulder. Its purpose was to keep the rifle firmly on the shooter's shoulder to help control automatic fire. The original M1918 had neither a butt plate nor a bipod. The bar, in all its variants and adaptations over its more than 60 years' employment by the United States Army, Marine Corps, and National Guard, was always an open-bolt weapon. Since it was air-cooled and generated great heat in fully automatic fire, it had to be an open-bolt weapon to prevent cook-offs. Open bolt meant that at the end of every firing cycle and upon trigger release, the last cartridge casing was ejected as a bolt moved to the rear, where it remained locked until the trigger was again pulled. Having the bolt locked to the rear of the chamber facilitated cooling of the barrel and breech area. When the trigger was again pulled, the bolt traveled forward, stripping a new round from the magazine and chambering it. If the weapon were a closed bolt, after the trigger was released on a weapon that had cartridges remaining, the bolt would be forward and closed against a chamber containing a loaded cartridge. The heat from the chamber and barrel could be sufficient to detonate the round, an unintended and dangerous firing known as a cook-off. Many bar men modified the weapon. The most frequent modification was removing the 2-pound bipod, which saved weight and also made the weapon more likely to be used in a constantly moving scenario. The original World War I bar cartridge belt had 3 pouches on the left side, each of which held 2 magazines. The right side had 2 pouches for 2 magazines each, giving the shooter a total of 10 magazines in the belt. In place of the right front pouch was a metal cup used to support the weapon firmly when firing it from the hip. The shooter simply inserted the butt of the bar into the cup so that the bar was braced as the shooter stood to fire. After World War I, the right side cup was removed from the belt. The new belt configuration had 3 pouches on each side, giving the shooter a total of 12 magazines. The barman now had 260 rounds available for his use, 12 magazines with 20 rounds each in belt pouches plus a magazine in the weapon. With additional ammunition nearby, carried by an assistant, and the ability and training to reload his weapon quickly, the barman was truly an inspiring addition to any assault unit. The high penetration power of the bar was a welcome advantage in jungles or forests. Firing .30-06 ammunition, the bar would kill even after blasting through trees and logs that would routinely stop hand grenade fragments or lower velocity .45 caliber rounds used in submachine guns and pistols. The bar did have several disadvantages. Its powerful .30-06 cartridge produced strong recoil, which made the weapon climb in fully automatic fire and caused the shooter to often miss the target at the end of a burst. Unlike its chief rivals, the British Bren and the Japanese Nambu, both of which had 30-round magazines and changeable barrels, the bar's magazine capacity was only 20 rounds and its barrel could not be changed. This limited its capacity for fully automatic fire. Residue fouled the bar's gas-operated functioning. Fully aware of the residue problem, barmen kept their weapons thoroughly cleaned. 2 aspects of the bar in combat are noteworthy. First, the casualty rate for barmen was high since a general rule of combat is to eliminate enemy gunners armed with automatic weapons. As a result, barmen were priority targets for enemy fire. Second, numerous Medal of Honor citations from World Wars I and II and the Korean War mention the bar. Perhaps the greatest shooting feat was accomplished by Army PFC Henry Schauer, who earned a Medal of Honor in Italy while serving with the 3D Infantry Division in 1944. Standing in the face of enemy fire, he killed 5 German snipers with his bar. The snipers were at different distances from him. Amidst enemy shelling and small arms fire, he killed 2 machine gunners and 2 Germans who ran to replace their dead comrades. The German runners were 60 yards from him. Reloading, he then killed 4 Germans who were 500 yards away. The next day, in the face of enemy tank and small arms fire. He killed 4 members of a German machine gun crew at 80 yards with 1 bar burst. Between the world wars, both law enforcement agencies and criminals used bars. Perhaps the most notorious use of the bar during this time was Clyde Barrow, the notorious Bonnie and Clyde gangster pair, who used bars stolen from National Guard armories during several robberies in the 1930s. The 7 lawmen who killed Bonnie Parker and Barrow used government-provided bars, as well as shotguns and pistols, during the ambush that killed the pair in Louisiana on the 23rd of May, 1934. 4 bars stolen by Barrow from the armories were found in his car after the ambush. An early personal connection with the legendary weapon was formed for the author of this article in 1961 when his father's boss, Joe Bushett, came to the author's Ithaca in New York, home to visit. Bushett was a Marine Corps barman in the Pacific Theater during World War II. He had turned his head in response to a warning shouted from one of his buddies as several Japanese soldiers firing weapons emerged from a cave. A bullet, which might have hit squarely between his eyes had he not turned after hearing the shouted warning, nicked the bridge of his nose and tore out one of his eyes. Feeling no pain and thinking only that a splinter of rock had momentarily blinded him, he opened fire with his bar, cutting down all 4 Japanese soldiers with 1 long burst. 30 minutes later, during a lull in combat, he asked a Navy corpsman to look at his eye. "It's gone, Joe, and you are going home," the corpsman told him. Bushett gave a remarkable testimonial to the weapon and his own courage. "The bar was my best friend in combat, but I felt like I got an easy ticket home with my 3rd wound, only losing my eye." Bushett had survived his 3rd Pacific Island landing assault, beating the odds for anyone carrying a bar. The author's oldest brother, Jack Cummings, was one of the first U.S. Marine officers in Vietnam in 1965 and a lieutenant leading combined action platoon of U.S. Marines and South Vietnamese Army soldiers. Jack recently sent the author his written recollections of combat in Vietnam. "Our battalion had several Vietnamese barmen who served with us in combat. I remember one of them standing tall on a rice paddy dike and opening up on a Viet Cong position with his bar. I never saw a braver man or a more awesome one-man weapon." With all the advanced weaponry available to the infantry today, a modern soldier would have difficulty looking back and appreciating the simple equipment provided to the American doughboys of World War I as they fought what was optimistically referred to as the war to end all wars. The Browning automatic rifle, when it first arrived in France, must have caused sensation since it was a weapon so advanced for its time. Even 90 years after its introduction, the bar's legacy remains, with its superb design, high power, and reliability securing its prominence in small arms history. The bar's enduring reputation also lay in the way it bridged the gap between the bolt-action rifle and the true light machine gun. It was neither a squad automatic weapon in the modern sense, nor merely a rifle with an extended magazine. It was a battlefield compromise that reshaped infantry tactics. In the hands of determined soldiers, its shortcomings could be overcome, and its virtues amplified. By World War II, doctrine across all combatant nations increasingly recognized that squads and platoons lived or died on the strength of their automatic fire. The German army placed the milligram 34 and later milligram 42 at the center of squad tactics. The British trusted the Bren gun, and the Americans, while fielding weapons such as the M1919 medium machine gun, relied heavily on the bar as their portable solution. It was not uncommon for an American infantry squad to treat its barman as a cornerstone of its fire team, maneuvering riflemen around his bursts of suppressive fire. The bar's ability to function in harsh conditions, from the icy hedgerows of Normandy to the humid jungles of the Pacific, earned it grudging respect from those who carried it. Soldiers knew it would fire when needed, even if the weight bent their backs and the limited magazine capacity demanded constant reloads. Veterans often recalled the ritual of tap, rack, fire, hands working instinctively through the motions of keeping the weapon alive in the chaos of battle. Its role extended beyond the military sphere. As the 20th century unfolded, the bar became an icon in American culture, appearing in newsreels, war films, and even pulp crime stories. Its silhouette, long barrel, and distinctive box magazine came to symbolize not only raw firepower, but also the gritty determination of the men who wielded it. Even as new weapons like the M60 machine gun or the M16 rifle eventually replaced the bar in official service, its legend endured in the oral histories of veterans and in the museums that preserved its memory. For many, The bar was not simply a weapon of war, but a companion in the most desperate moments of life, a steel lifeline carried across shell-pocked fields, dense forests, and distant rice paddies. When military historians speak of the evolution of small arms, the bar is often mentioned as both a transitional weapon and a timeless one. Transitional because it marked a step toward the squad automatic weapons that would dominate infantry tactics in later wars, and timeless because its design, conceived in 1917, proved adaptable and dependable across half a century of combat. Few weapons of its era can claim the same longevity or cultural imprint. The bar's story, then, is not just that of John Browning's mechanical genius, nor solely of the armies that issued it. It is also the story of the countless soldiers, doughboys, GIs, Marines, and Allies who shouldered its weight, trusted its power, and sometimes gave their lives with its grip still clenched in their hands. As the Cold War dawned, the bar was still present, lingering in arsenals and even seeing combat in Korea. In the desperate fighting around the Pusan perimeter in 1950, Marine and Army units relied on bar men to break up mass North Korean infantry assaults. Veterans of those battles recall the sight of a single bar sweeping across waves of charging soldiers, its .30-06 rounds cutting through brush, doubt, and bodies with grim finality. In those moments, the weapon seemed less a relic of a past war than a still relevant tool of survival. In Vietnam, though newer designs had largely replaced it in American service, the bar persisted in the hands of South Vietnamese units and irregular forces. Its familiar bark echoed across rice paddies and jungle tree lines, a ghost of earlier wars refusing to fade. For many who carried it, the bar symbolized a direct connection to their fathers and uncles who had fought in World War II. To shoulder it was to inherit their struggle and their memory. Military innovation eventually outpaced the bar. Squad automatic weapons like the M60 and later the M2 saw were designed for the very role the bar had been forced to fill by necessity. Lighter, with greater magazine or belt-fed capacity, these weapons pushed the bar into obsolescence. Yet soldiers who had carried the M1918 or the M1918A2 often compared the newer guns against their old workhorse, and the bar frequently came out with a grudging respect. Its reliability and raw power, if not its weight, earned it loyalty. Even today, collectors, reenactors, and museums keep the bar alive, polishing its walnut stocks and oiling its steel parts, as if maintaining a living artifact of the 20th century's most violent struggles. To heft one is to feel the same heft carried by the young men who went over the top in 1918, who stormed Normandy in 1944, who dug in at Chosin Reservoir in 1950, and who watched the green paddies of Vietnam turn red under its fire. The bar was more than a machine. It was a burden, a lifeline, a symbol. In its steel and would live the echoes of all who bore it, those who came home and those who never did. And though it has long since left the front lines, its story still marches on, etched into the collective memory of warfare. In every war it served, the bar became more than an instrument of tactics. It became a witness. Its heavy receiver absorbed the shock of recoil and the sweat of trembling hands. Its stock was darkened not just by oil, but by the blood of the men who clutched it when they fell. To those who survived, the weapon was remembered with respect, even affection, but also with a haunted knowledge that its bark had silenced countless others. The barman was both feared and doomed. His comrades relied on him to anchor the assault, to cut down charging enemies, to pin heads in trenches or tree lines. But the enemy knew this too. To carry a bar was to carry a target on your back. Time after time, casualty lists proved the same grim truth. Those who bore the automatic firepower of the squad were rarely the ones to march home. And yet, despite the cost, the bar endured. It endured because war demanded it. Generals could debate strategy, politicians could promise peace. But on the ground, in the mud, the smoke, the ruined villages, it was a barman who turned the tide of small battles. His firepower was the difference between a unit shattered and a unit surviving. History remembers names of great commanders, but the silent line between survival and slaughter often rested in the 20 rounds slamming through a single steel box magazine. Decades later, veterans would sit in quiet rooms, bars long since replaced, and speak of it in voices softened by time. Some spoke with pride, others with bitterness, others with tears. They remembered its weight on their shoulder, the heat of its barrel after a long burst, the strange comfort of its mechanical rhythm when everything else dissolved into chaos. But they also remembered the faces beside them, the riflemen who fell while reloading, the assistant gunners who never rose again, the sudden silence when a barman was struck down and his weapon lay cooling in the date. In that silence, the legacy of the Browning automatic rifle is perhaps most clearly heard, not only as a marvel of engineering, but as a reminder of what modern war had become. Each innovation, each improvement in firepower, promised victory, yet each also deepened the shadows cast by the battlefield. The bar was no exception. It was a savior, and it was a curse. The bar's rhythm was a drumbeat of the 20th century's wars. Each burst tore through more than bodies. It shredded illusions. The young who carried it into battle often believed they were bringing freedom, or glory, or simply survival. Yet when the smoke cleared, what remained were torn fields, shattered towns, and the hollow eyes of survivors staring at the weapon that had decided who lived and who did not. For some, the bar was salvation. A desperate stand, a last magazine jammed into the well, a final burst holding back an enemy charge long enough for comrades to withdraw. In those moments, the weapon was more than steel. It was fate itself. But for others, it was a voice of death, echoing from hidden ditches, from the dark of jungle undergrowth, from ruined farmhouses across Europe. When the muzzle flashlit the night, it carried no allegiance, only destruction. Soldiers wrote home about its power, yet seldom about the cost. Families received medals in wooden boxes, folded flags, and telegrams that spoke of courage but not of the lonely silence after the bar fell silent in a mud-filled trench or blasted rice paddy. Those who lived with it carried invisible wounds, knowing that each pull of the trigger brought them further from the world they once knew, and closer to the shadows that would follow them home. The bar is remembered as a weapon of reliability, but it is also remembered in whispers, in the way veterans fell silent when asked about certain days, certain battles. Some could speak of its strength, its fire, its weight. Others could only shake their heads, staring into the distance as though the weapon still lay heavy in their hands. Time has moved on. Sleeker weapons fill the ranks now, lighter, faster, deadlier. But none carry quite the same aura. None carry the same ghostly presence of the bar, a weapon that walked with America through half a century of war, leaving behind a trail of victory intertwined with grief. Its steel still rests in museums, but its true presence lives in the memory of soldiers who shouldered it, in the silence after their stories break off, in the spaces where words can no longer reach. The bar spoke in thunder, but it never chose its words. Men chose for it, men who often had no choice at all. They lifted its weight in trembling hands, pressed their faces to its iron sights, and prayed that the next burst would not be their last. For some, the bar was the only shield between them and the void. For others, it was the iron tongue that pronounced their death sentence. Ammunition ran out. Barrels glowed red. Magazines clattered empty to the earth. And still the war demanded more. More rounds, more bodies, more lives poured into the endless hunger of the front. The bar was a companion in that hunger, its staccato roar feeding the more history. The dead often fell beside it. Some collapsed with their hands still gripping the stock, their final act frozen in wood and steel. Others slumped against its weight, eyes glazed, breath already gone, leaving the weapon to cool in silence beside them. In these moments, the bar seemed less like a machine than a grave marker, mute, cold, enduring. Those who lived long enough to hand it back, to lay it down in armories and depots, carried its echo with them. They carried it into their sleep, where bursts of fire shredded dreams. They carried it into their homes, where sudden noises made their hearts pound as if the old weapon was still at their side. They carried it into their graves, where silence finally swallowed the echoes. The Browning automatic rifle was never just a gun. It was weight. It was burden. It was salvation and damnation in the same breath. Its shadow fell across generations, and its story is not finished. Not while wars are fought, not while men still march with weapons that promise power and deliver only ruin. The bar is gone from the battlefield, but in every corner of history where its voice was heard, the ground still remembers. And in the silence after the last round is fired, the world is left to wonder if the price of such firepower was ever truly worth the blood it demanded. In the end, the bar was not a hero, nor a villain. It was a witness to courage and terror, to sacrifice and waste, to men who rose against impossible odds and to men who never rose again. Its steel body carried the fingerprints of countless soldiers. It was worn smooth by hands that would never hold their children again. The last bars now rest in glass cases, their muzzles forever silent. Visitors lean close, reading placards, snapping photographs, never feeling the weight in their shoulders or the fear in their chests. They see a relic. They do not hear the thunder, or smell the smoke, or feel the way the ground shook as a generation poured their lives through its magazine. But the silence is deceptive. For those who know, the bar still speaks, not in bursts of fire, but in the shadows of memory. It reminds us that every weapon born of ingenuity carries a price that cannot be measured in steel or brass. It reminds us that progress in war is always paid for in flesh. And as long as men remember the wars of the last century, the bar will remain, half legend, half ghost, etched into the dark ledger of history. Its voice has fallen silent, but its echo will never fade.